So somewhere along the line, someone told you that if you want nice tight joinery, you have to get a marking knife. You have to ditch the pencil. Pencils won't work, and a marking knife is the only way to go. I've actually read in comments where people have tried to tell me that they only do anything with a marking knife, which I think is kind of interesting. So you got a marking knife, and hopefully you tuned it up to the best of your ability. And now you have nice tight joints, but with gaps. I know, it doesn't make any sense to me either, but it happens. There's a very specific reason why. I'm gonna show you exactly why that is and how to avoid it, but first, I wanna do a little experiment. All right, I have this piece of ash here, and I have a piece of walnut. We're gonna put the piece of walnut into the ash, similar to a half lap. We're not gonna make a whole half lap, I just wanna recess it in there, just to give you the concept of the joint. And to do that, we're just gonna use a carpenter's pencil. This is just a regular carpenter's pencil. I like to keep scrap pieces laying around the benches so that I can kind of tune up my pencils once in a while when I need to. So I'm just gonna kind of color this side. I'm gonna flip it over and I'm gonna color this side. And what that gives me is sort of a knife point or a chisel point. Not nearly as good as an actual marking knife, of course, but we're gonna see what happens. So I'm gonna put my square up here. We're gonna hold that tight. We're gonna hold this tight, and I'm just gonna make my mark. Make sure that I've got enough on there. I'm gonna hold this tight here. I'm gonna come to the other side. Now, the only other thing that I need to do is I need to wrap this around so that when I take it to the table saw, that I actually can see where it is that I'm supposed to be cutting. All right, so hopefully you guys can see, we have our pencil lines on there. They're pretty fat in comparison to, say, what a marking knife would leave, but let's take this to the saw. We'll remove this material and we'll see how well the walnut fits in the ash. We'll give it a little hand plane action. Get rid of these pencil marks real quick. That way we can really see if there's any gaps. Okay, looks good to me. I mean, that looks like a pretty good joint to me. There's maybe a little tiny bit of a gap right here, and that could be because it slipped when I ran it through the saw. But for a very quick and dirty joint that's not coming apart at all, it doesn't wiggle, that's pretty good, and we used a carpenter's pencil. All right, so what gives? How are we able to do that with a carpenter's pencil? Well, a keen eye would have realized that by tuning it up on this scrap of wood, we're creating that knife edge, and then we're putting that knife edge right down into the corner here. So because it's on, at an angle, it's gonna leave a pretty fat mark, but I'm not worried about the entire width of that mark. What I'm concerned with is where the point of that lands. The point of this can't go into the walnut. It can only go up into that corner. So by scoring my line here and scoring my line on this side, I know the waste is in the middle, and then if I just cut out the middle, this is probably gonna fit just fine. Now, the opposite is true with a knife, and this is where I think people get screwed up. At least this is where I struggled when I first started using marking knives. With a marking knife, you're gonna have either one bevel or two bevels. This is a knife that I picked up from Woodcraft a while back. I spent about 3 hours tuning it to the way I wanted. You'll see I have it lapped all the way back in here, and that's so that if I had a tall piece of material like this, I could have a nice flat reference on this side and score down onto that piece of material. But either way, a knife is gonna have a flat side and it's gonna have a beveled side, similar to a plane iron, similar to a chisel, which means that this side is gonna go flat down into our material, but this side is going to create sort of a V shape. And the more times you run this through here, the more of a V shape that's going to give you. So even after that, when you take this to the saw or hand tools, however you're cutting that middle section out, if that V shape is on this side of the cut, it's going to make this part look like there's a big gap there. And there is a gap there, even though your joint is tight. So what I do is I bring this up here, and if I'm only worried about getting a score, I'll take it up here and I'll make one little scratch. Now you guys won't be able to see this on camera, there's absolutely no way, but what I have is a very hairline score mark right here. I can do the same thing here because I can just leave my pencil there. And now I have two very light passes right here, the exact width, as much as we can get it, to the width of this. But the problem is, if you take this, and instead of that light scoring pass, if you come in here over and over and over again, and you really get this line nice and dark, which now you guys might be able to see. The problem is that's where that V is. So this side is going straight down, this side is going in like this. So when I take this to the saw and I remove this material, this side will be perfect, this side will show that gap. Now, if you want to have a nice line like this, say you're gonna put a chisel in here or a saw or something like that, take your material just like this, give yourself, if I can get my stuff figured out here, give yourself that nice light line, just like this. We'll go ahead and give ourselves this line as well. But now what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep the bevel side to the waist side. And now I can run several lines through here and I'll be just fine. What about this side? Well, you can either switch hands or, referencing from the same side, I can drop my knife right into that first pass that I made, slide my square over, and go ahead and make my cuts. And now, if I cut this out at the saw, this will drop perfectly right inside of here, and my knife line and the tapered edge of it will be on the waist side. That'll leave zero gap right here, and I'll have a nice, clean, perfect fitting joint without any gaps.